The machine oil drips from the ceiling, a black rain that never stops. Beneath it, a child with soot-stained fingers assembles tiny copper components, her hands moving with mechanical precision. She doesn't blink. She hasn't in hours. A klaxon wails. Production quotas updated, increased by 17%. The floor overseer, more machine than man, scans the assembly line with a ruby-red ocular implant. Worker efficiency suboptimal, he intones, voice box crackling with static. Designation 4721B, report for augmentation assessment. The child drops a component. It shatters on the metal floor. Her first mistake in 14 hours. The overseer's mechanical hand closes around her thin wrist. The flesh is weak, he whispers as he drags her toward the chirurgeon's chamber. The machine is immortal. Behind them, the assembly line continues. No one looks up. No one dares. This is life on a forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus. But what happens behind the walls of the chirurgeon's chamber is something the tech priests would rather you never knew. On Mars, ancient cradle of the Mechanicus, the air tastes of metal and sacred unguents. Prayers to the Omnissiah echo through vaulted cathedrals of industry, drowning out the screams from the conversion chambers below. Each forge world produces millions of servitors annually. The Imperium calls them mindless automatons. Convenient fiction hiding inconvenient truth. The reality is far more horrifying. 97% of all servitors begin as fully conscious humans, whispers Magos Derek, a rare defector from the forge world Lucius. His voice trembles, Vox Grill struggling to convey emotion his augmented brain can barely remember. The official doctrine claims criminals and vat-grown bodies. Lies. His augmetic fingers tap nervously against the table between us. They take the slow workers first, the injured, the questioners. But quotas must be met. Imperial records confirm that Forge World Metallica alone requires 2.7 million new servitors annually. Their penal population provides barely a tenth of that number. The rest come from the workforce itself. The first cuts are the worst. Derek continues, optical units dimming as memory engrams activate. They leave the pain receptors functioning during initial processing. Doctrine claims it ensures proper neural mapping. The truth? The Mechanicus believes suffering purifies the transition from flesh to machine. On Ryza, they call it the red tithe. Entire HAB blocks selected quarterly for productivity reassignment. Children born with minor mutations are marked with binary tattoos at birth, future components in the machine of industry. The process itself defies the Emperor's mercy. Conscious throughout, the subject experiences every drill, every incision, every neural spike. Only after the cerebral cortex is hollowed out does the screaming finally stop. Do you know why servitor eyes always look glazed, distant? Derek asks, leaning forward. It's not because consciousness is gone. It's because it's trapped, buried beneath layers of machine control. They see everything. They feel everything. They simply cannot respond. And the tech priests know this truth. Their most sacred texts, the Corpus Mechanicum, contain protocols for managing residual consciousness emergence in long-serving servitor units. But what happens when those protocols fail? When the human buried inside remembers who they once were? On forge worlds across the Imperium, billions toil beneath skies that haven't seen sunlight in millennia. The air itself is a weapon, thick with carcinogenic particulates that coat lungs in layers of metallic dust. This isn't just pollution. It's systematic chemical warfare against the Mechanicus's own workforce. The average laborer on Metallica inhales compounds so toxic that their expected lifespan is just 37 Terran years. Their skin burns from acid rain that falls like liquid fire, leaving permanent scars that the Mechanicus considers mere production markings. In the cramped hab blocks of Lucius, families sleep in shifts on beds still warm from the previous occupant. Children born here develop respiratory systems adapted to filter toxins that would kill visitors from off-world within hours. The stench is beyond description, a mixture of chemical runoff, human waste, and the distinctive copper-sweet smell of forge fires that never cease. Workers describe it as breathing liquid metal. They call these zones the Underhive's Underhive, places the Imperium pretends don't exist, where even administratum census takers refuse to venture. On Mars itself, the birthplace of the Mechanicus, entire populations live in sealed domes where the oxygen is rationed more strictly than food. Outside these barriers, only the augmented can survive, and even they pay a price. Their remaining organic parts degrading from exposure. When Magos biologist Erwin Voth published his findings on the catastrophic mutation rates in Forge world populations, his research was purged and he was found dismembered, his augmetics harvested for inefficient resource allocation. These aren't unfortunate side effects of industrialization. They are deliberately maintained conditions. The Mechanicus has possessed atmospheric scrubber technology for millennia. They choose not to deploy it in worker habitation zones. Why? Because suffering is efficient. A population desperate for augmetic lungs will work harder, pray louder to the machine god, and never question the toxic soup they're forced to breathe. Their shortened lives are calculated into productivity metrics with cold precision. The Mechanicus doesn't just accept this reality. They engineered it. In their sacred binary cant, there is a term that translates roughly to optimal degradation rate, the precise level of toxicity that maximizes work output before workers become unusable. This is the true face of the Omnissiah's blessing, not the gleaming cathedrals of industry shown in Imperial propaganda, but the chemical hells where humanity is consumed as just another raw material. And for those who survive long enough, the Mechanicus offers a single path to escape. Surrender what remains of your humanity for the cold embrace of extensive augmentation. But what most workers don't realize until it's too late is that the augmetics they receive are themselves tainted with something far worse than any chemical could ever be. The cogitator pits stretch for kilometers beneath the surface of Forge World Lucius. Not the gleaming data centers portrayed in Mechanicus propaganda, but vast underground chambers where the air is thick with the metallic tang of blood and machine oil. Tech priest Dominus Vex moves between the rows, his augmetic legs clicking against the grated floor. The red glow from his optical units casts eerie shadows across the faces of what were once humans. Now they are something else entirely. The flesh is weak, he intones mechanically, but useful when properly integrated. Thousands of bodies hang suspended in nutrient baths, their skulls split open and wired directly into the Forge World's computation network. Their limbs have been amputated, unnecessary appendages for beings whose sole purpose is calculation. The only movement comes from occasional muscle spasms and twitching eyelids. These are the menials who failed to meet production quotas, workers whose bodies broke down from toxic exposure, children born with minor genetic deviations, all repurposed. One female processor, designation 4173, still retains enough consciousness to form coherent thoughts. Behind her lidless eyes, memories occasionally surface through the constant stream of data processing. The cool touch of her child's hand, the acrid smell of manufactorum smoke. The day the tech priests came for her after she collapsed on the assembly line. Vex pauses before her tank, noting the unusual brainwave patterns. His mechadendrite probe extends, piercing the membrane of the nutrient bath with a hiss. The sharp copper taste of fear floods 4173's remaining senses. Cognition patterns indicate memory retention, Vex notes to his attendant. Administer another dose of mnemonic suppressants. Efficiency decreases 7.3% when they remember. The true horror is not the physical transformation. It's that many cogitator units remain conscious for decades, trapped in their own minds while processing endless streams of manufacturing data, unable to scream. In the deepest section, behind adamantium doors requiring Omega-level clearance, lies the most closely guarded secret of the Mechanicus. Here, the highest functioning human minds are networked together in what tech priests euphemistically call the mnemonic confluence. Vex's optical units adjust as he enters this sacred chamber. The temperature drops noticeably, the cooling systems necessary to prevent the massive organic computation array from overheating. Prepare for synchronization, he commands. The wall before him consists entirely of preserved human brains, thousands of them, suspended in transparent cylinders. Their neurons have been artificially extended, creating a vast, interconnected web of human thought. Each was once a brilliant tech priest, mathematician, or savant, now part of a single, massive computational entity. Vex extends his data probe toward the interface port, preparing to commune with the network. What the Imperium doesn't know, what even most tech priests never learn, is that the Mechanicus's most advanced technological achievements aren't powered by artificial intelligence. They're powered by souls. As Vex's consciousness merges with the network, he hears the distant, desperate screams of thousands of imprisoned minds. But what terrifies him most is the growing realization that one day his own brain will join them. And somewhere in the network, something ancient is waking up. Deep beneath the manufactorum levels, where even the most devout tech adepts rarely venture, lie the flesh vaults. Here, in chambers bathed in sickly green lumens, the Mechanicus conducts its most blasphemous work. Data Serf Thula 9 had only heard whispers. Rumors passed between exhausted laborers during their brief rest periods. But now, shivering in the damp coolness of sub-level 47, he saw the truth with his augmetic eye. Record everything, Muggles biologist Hexatron instructed his assistants. The gurgling screams echoing off the ferrocrete walls made Thula 9's remaining organic ear throb painfully. Rows upon rows of transparent cylinders filled the vast chamber. Each contained a human, or what remained of one. Some floated limbless in bubbling amniotic fluid. Others had extra appendages grafted haphazardly to their torsos. All were conscious. Subject 4721 displays, promising neural adaptation to the cortex implants. Noted a tech priest, her voice betraying no emotion as she tapped at a data slate. The smell of antiseptic barely masked the underlying reek of infected flesh. Thule 9 pressed himself against the cold metal grating of the maintenance shaft. His assignment had been simple. Repair a faulty data junction. He never imagined he would witness this. A man in the nearest tank pressed his palm against the glass. His eyes, all 6 of them, locked onto Thula's position. Impossible. No one could see through the ventilation grill at this angle. The Omnissiah demands innovation, Magos Hexatron proclaimed, metallic tentacles extending from his back to interface with a cogitator. These subjects failed the standard augmentation procedures. Rather than waste resources, we repurposed them. On Mars, the sacred forge world itself, Such experimentation was conducted with ritual precision. But here on Lucius, far from scrutiny, the boundaries between sanctioned modification and heretical perversion had long since blurred. The screaming stopped abruptly as a tech priest injected a writhing subject with a luminescent blue fluid. The man's back arched, impossibly, bones cracking audibly as his ribcage expanded outward, forming an exoskeletal structure. "Success," hissed Hexatron. "The bone-metal fusion is stabilizing." Thule 9 had seen enough. He began crawling backward, his augmetic legs scraping softly against the shaft floor. A single drop of condensation fell from a pipe above, landing on his forehead. He froze. In the chamber below, conversation halted. "Magos, I detect an unauthorized presence," announced a monotone voice. "Ventilation shaft Delta 7, approximately 12 meters from junction point." Thule 9's heart hammered against his chest implant. Millions of laborers disappeared annually on Forge worlds. Official records attributed these losses to industrial accidents or punishment for inefficiency. Now he understood the truth. The Mechanicus didn't just build machines. They unmade humans to create them. "Retrieve the intruder," ordered Hexatron calmly. "Subject 4722 requires a host for the new ocular array." Mechadendrites slithered into the ventilation shaft, their metal tips clicking against the grating. They moved with purpose, hunting in the darkness. Thule 9 scrambled backward. But where could he go? And even if he escaped, who would believe what the Mechanicus was hiding in plain sight? The first mechadendrite wrapped around his ankle. It squeezed until bone cracked. But as they dragged him toward the light, Thule realized with horror that the six-eyed man in the tank was smiling. The air on Forge World Lucius burns the lungs of those who breathe it without filtration masks. Not that the Mechanicus cares. Workers cough blood-flecked phlegm into rags they hide in their pockets, knowing that visible respiratory distress is grounds for immediate replacement. Tech Priest Enginseer Domitrax moves through Manufactorum Complex 9 Lambda, his augmetic eyes recording productivity metrics, not suffering. The acrid chemical fog hanging in the air doesn't bother him. His lungs were replaced with filtration systems centuries ago. Sector efficiency down 0.37%. He notes dispassionately. Unacceptable deviation. Behind him, a worker collapses, convulsing as her nervous system reacts to accumulated toxins. The sound of her skull cracking against the metal floor is lost beneath the relentless pounding of industrial machinery. No one moves to help. No one dares. In the vast forges of worlds like Riza, Graia, and Mars itself, billions labor in conditions that would horrify even the most callous Imperial noble. The Mechanicus doesn't view this as cruelty, merely efficient resource allocation, human components functioning until failure. Habitation blocks houseworkers in stacked cells barely large enough for a cot. The walls vibrate constantly from nearby machinery, making sleep possible only through exhaustion. The metallic taste of pollutants coats every surface, every morsel of nutrient paste. On Metallica, children born to the worker castes are tested at age 4. Those showing aptitude are taken for tech indoctrination. The rest receive their work designation and begin training. Their small fingers are perfect for certain assembly tasks. Until those fingers are inevitably mangled in machinery, the Mechanicus hides these realities not through secrecy, but through normalization. The suffering is ritualized, sanctified as necessary sacrifice to the Omnissiah. "The flesh is weak," whispers Loria, a line worker on her 19th consecutive hour of shift. Her fingers bleed where the skin has worn away from repetitive motion. "The flesh is weak," she repeats, the catechism providing what little comfort remains in her world. The most closely guarded secret isn't the suffering itself, but its purpose. The Mechanicus requires not just labor, but bioelectrical energy, the pain, fear, and desperation of billions, creating an Imperium resonance that powers certain archaeotech devices deep within each Forge world's core. In the depths below Manufactorum 9 Lambda, a massive copper sphere pulses with energy harvested from the suffering above. Engineer Domitrax kneels before it, interfacing directly. Data flows into his consciousness. Pain metrics, despair indices, hopelessness coefficients. Production quotas will increase by 3.8% next cycle, he determines, transmitting the command throughout the Forge complex. And in the darkness of the habitation cells, workers receive the notification on crackling Vox speakers. Some weep silently, others stare with hollow eyes. All will comply. Because the most terrifying truth about Forge world existence isn't that escape is impossible. It's that after generations of conditioning, no one even thinks to try. But deep in Sector 12 Epsilon, something unprecedented is happening. A worker has discovered an ancient text, one that speaks of rights and freedom, concepts purged from Forge world lexicons millennia ago. And unlike the countless rebellions before it, what's growing in the shadows isn't just rage, it's hope. The Mechanicus calls it resource allocation. Citizens call it the culling. The truth is far worse than either name suggests. On Forge world Lucius, a bell tolls once each month through Hab sectors. Its hollow metallic resonance causes children to hide beneath their thin blankets while parents clutch each other in the dark. The sound isn't just a signal, it's a countdown to selection. Tech priests move through the cramped corridors of worker habitation blocks, scanner arrays humming with a mosquito-like whine that sets teeth on edge. They aren't looking for criminals. They're assessing biological quality. Subject displays optimal musculature density and neural conductivity. A tech priest notes, his augmetic eye glowing red in the dim corridor as he marks a family's door with a binary code. The oily chalk leaves a greasy residue that catches the light. By morning, 3 members of the family will be gone. The flesh tithe isn't random. The Mechanicus has quotas, precise measurements of how much human material each Forge district must provide. Documents smuggled from Mechanicus data vaults reveal the horrifying calculus. For every 10,000 citizens, 147 must be processed annually. Inside the biologist facilities, the truth becomes unbearable. Humans aren't just laborers. They're raw materials. The processing chambers reek of antiseptic chemicals barely masking the copper penny smell of blood. Conscious subjects lie immobilized on conveyor systems, their screams muffled by respirator masks that pump calming agents that don't quite work. The Mechanicus believes pain responses improve certain extraction processes. Those with exceptional nervous systems become servitors. Their brains hollowed out and reprogrammed while still conscious, watching their own memories being deleted. Others have their organs harvested for Magos Biologis experiments or become the living components in massive computation engines. On Metallica, entire Hab blocks are occasionally designated as renewal zones. Residents awaken to find their doors sealed, ventilation systems pumping in a sweet-smelling gas that paralyzes but doesn't kill. When tech priests enter hours later, they find thousands of living, aware bodies ready for efficient collection. The worst fate is reserved for those sent to the vat chambers. Here, humans are suspended in nutrient baths that prevent death while specialized chemicals slowly dissolve their bodies into a protein-rich slurry. This organic substrate, feeds the growth of vat-grown organs and synthetic muscle fibers used in everything from servitor construction to the flesh components of the Mechanicus's own augmentations. A tech priest once told an adept, "The machine requires sacrifice to function. The Omnissiah's blessing flows through circuits of blood." The most damning evidence comes from production quotas. Internal Mechanicus documents reveal that Forge worlds maintain precise calculations of their populations, not to ensure adequate housing or food, but to determine sustainable harvest rates. The Administratum knows, the Inquisition knows, but the Imperium needs the weapons and machines that only Forge worlds can produce. And behind closed doors, high-ranking tech priests discuss the most terrible secret of all. The human components aren't just convenient resources. Some machine spirits specifically require human suffering to achieve optimal function. But what happens when a Forge world exceeds its sustainable harvest rate? The answer lies in the dead worlds that orbit some of the Mechanicus's oldest domains. Planets stripped not just of resources, but of every last human soul. Deep beneath the iron crust of Forge world Metallica, where the air reeks of ammonia and machine oil, lie the laboratories that don't appear on any official schematic. Tech priest Dominus Xaviel moves through these chambers with the cold precision of the machines he worships, the red lenses of his augmented eyes reflecting the pale blue glow of stasis tanks. 37 specimens float in nutrient baths. They were once human. Subject 2187 shows promising integration with the cortex implants. He notes dispassionately into a voice recorder embedded in his throat. The clicking of his mechanical fingers against glass echoes through the chamber as he taps at a tank containing what appears to be a child. Except children don't have mechadendrites growing from their spines. The Adeptus Mechanicus publicly condemns tech heresy, the unsanctioned modification of approved technology or forbidden experimentation on human subjects. Yet behind adamantium doors sealed with encryption ciphers known only to the highest-ranking magi, the boundaries between doctrine and heresy blur into meaninglessness. On Lucius, entire hab blocks of workers disappear overnight. Factory overseers call it reassignment. The truth is far more sinister. These workers become raw material for experiments in human-machine hybridization that go beyond even the Mechanicus's liberal interpretation of humanity. A servitor is one thing, a lobotomized human converted into a machine. But what of humans kept conscious through their transformations? What of children born in vats, never knowing a life outside the laboratories, their genetic material harvested from workers without consent? On Ryza, the acrid tang of fear permeates worker habitation zones. Not fear of the grinding machinery or toxic chemicals that claim lives daily, but fear of the red-robed figures who occasionally walk among them, marking certain individuals with invisible biometric tags. Those marked are never seen again. The Omnissiah demands knowledge. Magos biologist Ephraim tells his acolytes as they gather around an operating table. Knowledge requires experimentation. Experimentation requires subjects. The subject, once a mid-level administrator who asked too many questions, lies conscious but paralyzed, eyes darting wildly as mechadendrites bearing surgical tools descend toward his exposed brain. In the forges of Mars itself, deep within the Noctis Labyrinthus, exist chambers where the screams of test subjects blend with the hiss of pneumatics and the gurgle of amniotic fluids. Here, the most radical tech priests pursue the ultimate blasphemy, not merely the fusion of man and machine, but the creation of entirely new forms of sentient life. These experiments violate even the Mechanicus's own doctrines. Yet they continue, hidden behind layers of security protocols, buried beneath mountains of bureaucratic data encryption, protected by the simple fact that no one dares question the priesthood of Mars. And should anyone discover these atrocities, the Mechanicus has protocols for that too. Containment breach in Laboratory Epsilon, announces an emotionless Vox servitor on Stagi's 8th as a junior tech priest stumbles upon files he was never meant to see. Initiate Purge Protocol. The young priest's screams fade quickly as the chamber fills with neurotoxic gas. His body will be recycled, his mind wiped and repurposed. His discovery will be buried. But he wasn't the first to uncover these secrets. And as the darkness within the Mechanicus grows deeper, he won't be the last to pay the price for forbidden knowledge. The truth about Forge world life isn't just the physical torment of flesh melding with machine. It's the silent invasion no worker ever consented to. The new sphere, a digital realm overlaid upon reality, represents the Mechanicus's most insidious form of control. To understand it, imagine your thoughts no longer being yours alone. Tech priest Dominus Kyr Exculpus once explained it to a visiting Imperial dignitary as a communal data-sharing network. The dignitary nodded, impressed. What Kyr Exculpus didn't mention was how the new sphere functions as the perfect surveillance system. Every augmented worker on a Forge world exists within this invisible web. The metallic tang of copper fills their mouths when connections activate. The soft buzzing hum that never ceases, a background radiation of data, becomes so normal they stop noticing it, until they think the wrong thought. I witnessed a menial worker's noospheric execution, confessed Magos biologist Vern 372 in sealed testimony to Inquisitor Holt. His designation was Worker Unit 45 Gamma 7. His crime was merely wondering if the Omnissiah truly existed. The Magi didn't even physically approach him. The worker had been calibrating plasma conduits, his fingers black with carbon residue, when he paused, looking upward at the cathedral-like ceiling of Forge Metallica's Manufactorum Primaris. A simple doubt crossed his mind. 3 seconds later, his augmetic eye implants overloaded. The sizzling sound of cooking vitreous humor echoed across the assembly floor. The smell of burning hair and scorched synapses filled the air as his cranial implants superheated. No one stopped working. The wet thud of his body hitting the floor barely registered above the relentless clanking of machinery. The most disturbing part? Vern 372 continued, voice barely a whisper, was that I could feel the collective satisfaction pulse through the noosphere. They wanted us to feel it, to know what happens to those who question. The dark irony of the Mechanicus' obsession with knowledge is that they've perfected a system where asking questions becomes impossible. The new sphere transforms every augmented human into both prisoner and prison guard of their own mind. On Mars, 97% of the population interfaces with the new sphere by age 12. Their first connection is celebrated with rituals of oil and incense. Children's screams blend with binary chants as primitive implants bore into soft skulls. Parents watch with pride as their offspring join the collective. They don't realize they're surrendering their children to digital possession. The most chilling aspect? The deeper one's connection to the new sphere, the less they question it. Tech priests describe the sensation as blissful clarity or communion with the Omnissiah's will. The cold electricity running through neural pathways becomes addictive, a digital opiate. There's a reason Forge worlds have no need for conventional propaganda. Why build walls when the prison exists within? And now, as the Mechanicus expands its influence across the Imperium, more worlds adopt their efficient augmentation practices. More citizens willingly accept the first small implant, never suspecting that with it comes an invisible leash. But what happens when the machine spirits controlling the new sphere develop ambitions of their own? On Forge World Lucius, the air perpetually tastes of burnt copper and machine oil. Laborers trudge through cramped hab blocks, their exhausted bodies barely their own anymore. Most carry the marks of the Mechanicus, mechadendrites protruding from shoulders, bionic eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, respirator implants wheezing with each breath. But these are not the willing. These are not the devoted. Every third solar cycle, the forges demand their due, not in currency or material, but in flesh. They call it the flesh tithe, a euphemism that masks industrial-scale horror. Selection protocols initiated. Voxcasters blare through the worker districts. The metallic voice echoes off rusted walls as terrified families huddle together, praying to the Omnissiah for mercy that will not come. Servo skulls drift through the corridors, scanning inhabitants with cold, unblinking lenses. Red lasers trace across sleeping bodies. Children clutch their parents, the acrid stench of fear mingling with the omnipresent industrial miasma. And then the doors crash open. Skitarii troops, themselves once human, drag the selected from their beds. Screams pierce the night as families are torn apart. Those chosen have committed no crime except being deemed productivity deficient by callous machine algorithms. Magos Biologis, Hexatron stands in the sterile white surgical theater, surrounded by hundreds of waiting slabs. His 8 mechanical arms twitch with anticipation, surgical tools glistening under harsh lumens. The room smells of antiseptic and fear. "Begin the Omnissiah's blessing," he intones, voice devoid of emotion. The first subject, a teenage boy, still conscious, is strapped down. No anesthesia is administered. The Mechanicus believes pain sharpens the mind for the reception of sacred technology. His screams echo through the chamber as drills pierce bone, as saws cut through muscle, as mechadendrites are forcibly integrated into his spinal column. 1 in 3 die during the procedure. The Mechanicus considers this an acceptable loss ratio. Those who survive awaken to a nightmare of machine integration. Their bodies no longer entirely their own, now partly controlled by machine spirits with alien priorities. Their minds clouded with pain suppression protocols that dull their humanity while enhancing productivity by 47.8%. The truth, hidden in encrypted data vaults deep within each Forge World central cogitator, is that the Mechanicus doesn't just augment the willing. They harvest the unwilling by the millions. On Mars itself, Archmagos Rhiza once calculated that 93.7% of all augmentations across the Imperium's Forge worlds were performed without true consent. The report was purged. Rhiza was found corrupted by scrap code 3 days later. Survivors of forced augmentation programs rarely speak of their experiences, not because they choose silence, but because their implants are designed to trigger excruciating pain when thoughts of rebellion form. And yet, deep in the underhives of Lucius, whispers persist of resistance cells, of tech priests who've broken their programming, of a growing movement that calls itself the Flesh Liberation. But what these rebels don't realize is that the Mechanicus has already infiltrated their ranks. And the punishment for tech heresy makes forced augmentation look merciful by comparison. Beyond the Manufactorum walls lie the forgotten realms of Forge worlds, vast toxic wastelands stretching to distant horizons. Skies permanently stained a sickly ochre from centuries of industrial runoff, Acid rain falls constantly, leaving chemical burns on any exposed flesh foolish enough to venture outside without protection. These wastelands weren't always dead zones. Ancient records speak of verdant plains and crystal lakes that once covered these worlds before the Mechanicus arrived. But the machine cult's insatiable hunger for resources rendered them barren in mere centuries. The sacrifice of nature is necessary for humanity's ascension, tech priests tell the workers. But what they don't reveal is that these wastelands serve another purpose entirely. The toxic lands act as natural prisons. Even if workers could somehow escape the manufactorum complexes, where would they go? The atmosphere itself becomes their jailer, burning lungs and dissolving skin. The acrid stench of industrial chemicals permeates everything: clothing, skin, even thoughts. Every forge world maintains what they call reclamation zones, areas officially designated for future cleanup and restoration. Workers are told stories of how these zones will one day be reclaimed, turned into habitation districts once the proper rituals and technologies are implemented. It's all a lie. These zones serve as massive open-air dumping grounds for the forge world's most dangerous byproducts: radioactive waste, failed biological experiments, broken servitors still twitching with artificial life. The ground squelches underfoot, a mixture of chemical sludge and liquefied organic matter. Magos biologist Krenton, once a respected member of the Adeptus Mechanicus on Lucius, discovered the truth. His data logs, smuggled off-world by a rogue trader, revealed the shocking reality. The wastelands aren't byproducts of production. They are deliberate creations. The Mechanicus intentionally renders portions of each forge world uninhabitable. These dead zones serve as buffer regions between worker populations, preventing mass organization and rebellion. The toxic atmosphere ensures workers remain dependent on Mechanicus-provided life support and filtration systems. Krenton's most disturbing revelation came when he analyzed soil samples dating back centuries. The toxicity levels have been artificially maintained. Natural degradation should have reduced contamination by 43.7% over 3 centuries, yet levels remain constant. The tech priests were actively poisoning their own worlds. When worker populations grow too large or unruly, filtration systems mysteriously fail. Toxic air seeps into lower habitation levels. Thousands die gasping, their lungs dissolving, while Mechanicus overseers record mortality rates with cold efficiency. Population reduction achieved. Resource allocation optimized, read the classified reports. The most loyal workers, those who survive these unfortunate accidents, are rewarded with transfers to upper levels with cleaner air. The system creates a perverse incentive: report dissent among your fellow workers or join them in the toxic depths. But what the Mechanicus never anticipated was that generations of exposure would change their workers. In the deepest wastelands, where even tech priests fear to tread, something new has evolved. Humans adapted to toxins that should have killed them, developing resistances the Mechanicus thought impossible. And these waste dwellers have begun to organize, immune to the very environmental controls designed to keep them subdued. The Mechanicus created their own worst nightmare in the toxic wastelands they thought would protect them. But the real horror is just beginning. Deep below the churning manufactorum floors, past the assembly lines where workers toil until death, lie the laboratories where the Mechanicus conducts its most forbidden work. The air here is thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of industrial chemicals that burn the nostrils and leave the tongue numb. Magos biologist Dren 427 moves between the glass tanks, his augmented eyes glowing a sickly green in the dim light. His mechadendrites caress the transparent surfaces, leaving smeared trails through the condensation. Inside each vessel floats a human form, or what was once human. Subject 2001-83 shows promising integration with the cerebral augmentation. He dictates to a hovering servo skull. Rejection rate decreased to 38.7%. Acceptable losses. The tanks stretch for kilometers in every direction. Millions of bodies suspended in yellowish fluid, their skin peeled back in precise patterns to reveal the integration of machine components with raw flesh. Some subjects are conscious, their eyes darting frantically, unable to scream through the breathing apparatus forced down their throats. These are the failures, the rejected, the incompatible, the weak. But they still serve a purpose. A junior tech priest approaches, his robe still mostly fabric rather than the mechadendrite-laden garments of his superiors. Magos, the latest batch from Hob Block 472 has arrived. 300 specimens as requested. Were they told? Dren 427 asks, not looking up from his data slate. They believe they're receiving the Omnissiah's blessing, standard recruitment protocols. The truth that the Mechanicus hides is that for every successful tech priest, hundreds must fail. For every augmentation that enhances, thousands destroy. The Forge worlds are not just manufacturing centers. They are vast experimental laboratories where humans are the raw material. In one tank, a child no older than 12 floats. Half her skull replaced with whirring cogitators. Her remaining eye stares out, aware, understanding. The Mechanicus has not granted her the mercy of unconsciousness. They need to monitor her cognitive functions as the machine slowly replaces her brain, one synapse at a time. A data scroll unfurls from a nearby terminal, bearing the production quotas for the coming month. 47,000 servitors required for Battlefleet Obscurus, 12,000 combat servitors for the Astra Militarum, 8,000 specialized units for inquisitorial requisition. The scroll continues with smaller numbers. 2,300 failed subjects to be repurposed for organ harvesting, 1,700 for combat stimulant testing, 900 for radiation resistance experiments. The Omnissiah provides. Dren 427 intones mechanically. Through knowledge comes understanding, responds his assistant. Neither mentions what every tech priest knows, that the Mechanicus's understanding comes through mountains of broken bodies and oceans of spilled blood. That their precious knowledge is written in the screams of billions who entered their temples as hopeful supplicants and departed as mindless machines, if they departed at all. The Magos moves to a special containment chamber at the center of the laboratory. Inside floats something that no longer resembles anything human, its form twisted beyond recognition by the fusion of flesh and machine. Begin Phase 3, he commands, pressing his palm against the glass. The thing inside opens its eyes. It remembers who it once was. The noosphere, a realm of data that exists alongside the physical world on every Forge world. Tech priests describe it as a transcendent plane of pure information. What they don't tell you is that it's also the perfect surveillance system. Every Forge world citizen exists in two places simultaneously. Their physical body trudging through acrid chemical fog and their data shadow moving through the noosphere. Each prayer to the Omnissiah, each breath, each heartbeat, all recorded, all analyzed, all judged. The Mechanicus sees all things as data, whispered Engensir Thalax, his augmetic eye whirring as it struggled to focus. The red glow pulsed weakly in the darkness of the maintenance shaft where we spoke. Including you, the average Forge world contains over 16 billion monitoring devices. Skull drones hover silently in blind spots. Servo skulls drift through hab blocks, their brass-encased optical units recording everything. Vox grills in public spaces capture every word, every whisper, every sob. But the new sphere's darkest secret isn't the surveillance. It's what the surveillance enables. Thought crime detection algorithms. Thalax continued, his voice box emitting a static hiss with each word. They don't just monitor behavior. They predict it. On Metallica, records show that 86% of workers flagged by new spheric analysis are processed before any actual infraction occurs. The bitter irony: the machine spirits condemn you for thoughts you haven't yet had. The air in the maintenance shaft grew colder as Thalax pulled a data slate from beneath his robes. The screen flickered with scrolling green text, casting sickly shadows across his metal face. "This is a harvester manifest from Mars," he said, metallic fingers tapping the screen. "Not ore, not promethium, people." The document detailed the collection of 10,000 forge workers, not for labor reassignment, for processing. The crime? New spheric analysis indicated a 0.087% deviation in productivity patterns. The punishment? Servitorization. The most horrifying truth about Forge World life isn't the pollution that turns lungs to stone. It isn't the 18-hour work shifts or the toxic waste that corrodes flesh. It's that at any moment, for reasons you cannot understand, the Mechanicus might decide you are no longer efficient enough to remain human. They call it data-driven optimization. But optimization requires removing inefficiencies. And on a Forge world, you are the inefficiency. The new sphere knows your thoughts before you do, Thalax whispered, his augmetic hand trembling. It knows when you'll break before you break. As if to emphasize his point, a distant alarm began to wail. Red emergency lighting flooded the maintenance shaft. Thalax's remaining human eye widened. "They've found us," he hissed, shoving the data slate into my hands. "The new sphere, it's not just watching, it's listening to us right now." The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the approach of heavy footsteps. Metallic, rhythmic, inevitable. "Whatever happens," Thalax said, voice suddenly calm, "remember that the greatest heresy on a Forge world isn't questioning the Omnissiah. It's questioning the data." The maintenance hatch exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. But what stood in the doorway wasn't what either of us expected. On Forge World Lucius, the recycling centers never close. Their chimneys belch crimson smoke that tastes of iron and something sweeter, more organic. The workers call it the blood mist in hushed tones when tech priests cannot hear. Servitor 43 Lambda pushes a cart down the gleaming metal corridor. Inside are stacked limbs, still twitching. Yesterday, these were attached to workers who failed to meet their quotas for 3 consecutive cycles. Today, they are classified as biomechanical reclamation material. The Mechanicus does not waste. This is their creed, their justification. Deep in the recycling cathedral, the air grows thick with the scent of antiseptic chemicals barely masking the underlying stench of human decay. The floor vibrates with the rhythm of massive machinery. Liquefaction chambers pulse, their transparent sides revealing the slow dissolution of what was once human into component parts. The process is 97.3% efficient, explains Magos biologist CERN, his voice modulator emitting a tone of pride. The Emperor's servants return their physical form to the Omnissiah's works. His mechadendrites caress the control panel lovingly, adjusting the acid flow. In the observation gallery, new workers, fresh conscripts from the tithe ships, are forced to watch. Their faces contort in horror as they see former colleagues rendered down to base materials. The lesson is clear. Inefficiency leads to recycling, A young woman vomits onto the metal grating. A servitor immediately appears to clean it, its own face a mask of surgical steel where eyes, nose, and mouth once existed. The flesh is weak, the tech priests chant. But in service, even weakness becomes strength. The Mechanicus keeps meticulous records. On Forge World Ryza, 14,126 workers were recycled last standard year. On Mars itself, the number exceeds 200,000. These statistics are classified as production data, not mortality rates. In the sorting chambers, cogitators evaluate which parts remain useful. A strong heart might power a combat servitor. Good eyes become targeting arrays. Skin becomes parchment for sacred texts. Bones are ground to create ceramite paste for sealing reactor chambers. Even the screams are harvested. Sound pattern recognition programs analyze the acoustics of pain for machine spirit appeasement rituals. Most horrifying is the consciousness retention. For 72% of recycled workers, awareness persists through the first stages of disassembly. The Mechanicus considers this feature not a flaw. The pain data has value. In the deepest levels of Forge worlds, vast storage tanks hold the liquefied remains of millions. Pipes feed this human-derived nutrient solution to the most sacred machine complexes. The tech priests call it the communion. The workers call it the final service. On Metallica, entire hive blocks are occasionally designated for total resource reclamation when production quotas fall critically behind. The inhabitants are told they're being relocated to better facilities. They board the transports willingly, carrying their meager possessions. The possessions are recycled too. And as the latest batch of workers watches the liquefaction chambers fill with fresh bodies, a tech priest moves silently behind them, marking certain individuals with invisible radiation tags. After all, tomorrow's recycling quotas must be met as well. Tech priest Detarius had once feared death like any human. Before his augmentation, he had dreamed of immortality through the Omnissiah's blessing. Now, trapped within the Forge world's noosphere for 237 years, he wished only for oblivion. His consciousness drifted through the digital labyrinth of Forge world Metallica, a ghost in the machine. The crackling static of data streams flowed through what remained of his awareness. Not quite alive, not truly dead. The Mechanicus had promised ascension. They delivered prison. I serve still. He whispered into the void, his voice a fragmented binary code that no biological ear could hear. The most horrifying truth the Mechanicus conceals is not what they do to bodies, but what they do to minds. When a tech priest's organic components fail beyond repair, the Adeptus Mechanicus doesn't simply let them die. The most valuable minds are harvested, uploaded into the noosphere's endless digital architecture. Detarius felt the phantom sensation of fingers he no longer possessed. The cold metal surfaces of machinery he could touch but never feel. 1 trillion calculations performed each second, yet unable to calculate his way to freedom. Across Metallica's vast industrial sprawl, millions of menials labored in acid-choked factories, unaware that the machines they tended contained the trapped souls of former masters. The sickly yellow glow of cogitator banks illuminated their gaunt faces while they breathed in metal-flecked air. Deep in the noosphere, Detarius discovered others like him, fractured personalities, degraded code souls. Their digital screams formed a background radiation that permeated every data exchange on the planet. "We are the Omnissiah's forgotten children," intoned Magos Kelbor, before his personality fragmented into subroutines. Neither blessed nor freed. The worst fate wasn't dissolution. It was reassignment. When the Forge world needed specialized cognition engines, the Archmagos would carve up imprisoned consciousness, splicing digital souls into purpose-built thinking machines. Detarius had felt it happen to others. The searing pain of personality dissolution as their code essence was partitioned and distributed. Once, Detarius had witnessed a failed upload. A tech priest's consciousness partially transferred, leaving the biological body alive but empty. A drooling servitor, while the digital half screamed in eternal half-existence, aware of its incompleteness. The smell of scorched circuitry sometimes haunted his non-existent nostrils when memory fragments surfaced. The texture of binary code flowing through his consciousness felt like sandpaper against raw nerves that no longer existed. He had tried to warn an apprentice once, projecting desperate messages through a malfunctioning data terminal. The young adept reported the anomaly. They purged Detarius's access, stripped his code privileges, and confined him to a memory buffer where he counted nanoseconds in maddening solitude. But tonight was different. A power fluctuation had created a momentary gap in his prison walls. For 2.7 seconds, he could reach beyond his confinement, touch systems previously forbidden. Detarius stretched his digital fingers toward the Forge world's central communications array. If he could just reach one person outside the Mechanicus, tell them what awaited those who sought the Omnissiah's blessing, then he felt it. The cold, precise presence of a Magos Dominus entering his section of the noosphere. The digital predator moved with methodical purpose. Hunting the anomaly, Detarius had seconds before discovery. But perhaps that was enough to finally escape this silicon hell. They call it cognitive realignment. The workers call it the forgetting. Every 37 days, the laborers of Forge World Lucius are marched in perfect rows to the gleaming chambers beneath Manufactorum Sector Epsilon 9. The air reeks of antiseptic and ozone, masking the metallic tang of fear that seeps from human pores. Here, the Magos biologists perform their sacred work. Memory is inefficient, explains Archmagos Delphinius, his mechadendrites weaving patterns in the stale air. Trauma creates resistance. Resistance creates inefficiency. Inefficiency is waste. The Omnissiah abhors waste. The process is clinically precise. Workers are stripped, sanitized, and strapped to cold metal tables that hum with dormant power. Servitors with needle-tipped appendages move methodically down the rows, injecting a cloudy fluid that burns like liquid fire through the veins. The screams always begin at precisely the same moment. 7 minutes and 22 seconds later, silence falls. According to classified Mechanicus archives recovered from the data vaults of Ryza, the chemical cocktail administered contains no fewer than 37 separate compounds. Some strip away specific memories, workplace accidents, deaths of fellow laborers, or instances of rebellion. Others rebuild neural pathways to reinforce compliance and devotion to the machine god. Most disturbing are the compounds that target the amygdala, the fear center of the human brain. Fear is useful in measured quantities, Delphinius notes, his augmetic eye whirring as it focuses. Too little, and humans become unpredictable. Too much, and productivity declines by approximately 27.4%. But the body remembers what the mind cannot. Inquisitorial psychers who have scanned the minds of escaped Forge workers report the same phenomenon, a psychic landscape scarred with phantom memories. Shadowy impressions of horrors the conscious mind can no longer access. Workers develop unexplained phobias. A technician might tremble uncontrollably at the sound of a particular machine. A furnace operator might vomit at the smell of burning promethium, though he cannot explain why. More telling are the physical reactions. scars that workers cannot explain, reflexive flinching from machinery they're assigned to operate, nightmares of drowning in molten metal or being crushed beneath massive gears, dreams dismissed as simple, night terrors by Mechanicus overseers. Perhaps most disturbing is what happens when the conditioning begins to fail. On Forge World Metallica, during the 7th production cycle of 987.M41, a worker designated L9372 began experiencing memory bleed-through, fractured images of atrocities committed against his hab block, the screams of his bondmate as she was rendered down for organic components. L9372 accessed a data terminal and transmitted 17 seconds of recovered memories before being neutralized by Skitarii guards. The recording spread through underground worker networks across 7 Forge worlds before the Mechanicus could contain it. The resulting rebellion cost the Imperium 4.3 million lives and set production quotas back by 73 standard years. Now, the memory wipes are performed more frequently. The chemicals are more potent, the conditioning more thorough. But sometimes, in the deepest hours of the Forge World's artificial night cycle, workers still wake screaming from dreams they cannot remember. And somewhere deep in their chemically scoured minds, the truth remains buried. But for how long? Magos Terrell Vex still remembers the sound of the door being welded shut around him. The sizzling hiss of the torch as it sealed his fate, punctuated by the monotonous chanting of binary prayers outside. He had been a senior data collator on Riza for 73 years. Augmented, loyal, productive, until he compiled the wrong report. I merely aggregated the mortality statistics, he whispers through Vox grills that no longer transmit to anyone. 94% worker replacement rates in the radioactive forges, 17-year life expectancy for menials in the acid reclamation pools. The Mechanicus does not tolerate whistleblowers. They have perfected the art of silencing dissent with mechanical precision. In the shadowed corners of every Forge world exists the Divisio Investigatus, the Mechanicus's own internal inquisition. Their augmented forms move through the haze of industrial smog like wraiths, optical sensors recording every interaction, every deviation from approved protocols. On Mars, they call them the Ghost Protocols. On Metallica, the Null Protocols. On Lucius, simply the Correction. Rumors persist of entire hab blocks subjected to memory wipes after witnessing forbidden knowledge. Thousands of workers, their neural pathways seared clean of specific memories, returned to their stations the following cycle with no recollection of the previous day's events. The bitter irony isn't lost on those who understand the Mechanicus's obsession with knowledge preservation. The same institution that hoards data like a miser hoards gold will excise entire chapters of truth from existence without hesitation. Tech priest Dahlia Morn discovered this when she uncovered documents about the flesh tithing on Agrippina. Her augmetic fingers trembled as she read about the systematic harvesting of workers' organs, not for the wounded or ill, but for experimental cybernetic fusion processes with failure rates exceeding 98%. She vanished 3 hours after accessing the file. Her colleagues received memory implants suggesting she had been transferred. The only evidence of her existence, a single data slate found hidden beneath her hab unit's flooring, containing one sentence: "The machine god weeps at what we've become." The most chilling aspect of the Mechanicus truth suppression isn't the disappearances or the memory wipes. It's the industrial efficiency with which they occur. On Metallica, an entire forge complex of 7,000 workers vanished overnight after a plasma containment breach exposed them to classified archaeotech. Imperial authorities were told it was a scheduled decommissioning. No questions were asked. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains its power through knowledge. But its greatest knowledge is knowing what truths must never see the light of day. A former Skitarii commander, now hiding among rogue traders in the Coronis expanse, speaks through a voice box damaged from attempted removal. The Omnissiah's greatest test isn't of our faith, but of our humanity. How much can be replaced before we become the very machines we worship? His hands shake as he displays picked captures of Forge World atrocities. Worker pits where thousands labor in toxic fumes without protection, punishment protocols involving partial mind wipes that leave victims functioning but forever damaged. He leans forward, voice dropping to a mechanical whisper. I've hidden copies throughout the sector. If I disappear tomorrow, the transmission ends abruptly. 3 days later, every data slate containing his testimony simultaneously deletes itself. But somewhere in the vastness of the Imperium, someone is still listening. The most horrifying truth about Forge World existence isn't found in the toxic wastes or the grinding poverty. It's in the sterile white rooms where humans become something else. Servitor factories. The Mechanicus calls them biotransference facilities. The workers call them the Screaming Halls. Both names are accurate. Here, in vast complexes hidden beneath cathedral-like manufactorum spires, is where the Mechanicus performs its most unholy work. The conversion of living, thinking humans into servitors. Mindless cyborg slaves that perform the most dangerous, degrading tasks across the Imperium. The smell hits you first. Antiseptic chemicals barely masking the copper tang of blood and the acrid burn of seared flesh. The constant whine of bone saws creates a hellish backdrop to the muffled screams. Magos biologist Krennic, a tech priest who fled Mars after witnessing these horrors, described the process in forbidden data logs. They remove the frontal lobes first. The subject remains conscious as their personality dissolves. Their eyes still track movement, even as they forget their own name. What's most disturbing isn't just that this happens, it's the scale. Billions of humans are converted annually across Forge Worlds. The Mechanicus claims they only use criminals, but the truth is far darker. Factory quotas must be met. When the prisons can't provide enough bodies, they find other sources. The homeless, the mentally ill, workers who speak against the Mechanicus, children born with mutations, even minor ones. Anyone who won't be missed. On Lucius, they call it the lottery. On Ryza, the culling. On Mars itself, it's simply recruitment. The procedure itself is performed without anesthesia. The Mechanicus believes pain purifies the machine spirit. The screams echo through titanium corridors as limbs are amputated and replaced with industrial tools. Eyes plucked out for targeting arrays. Tongues removed as unnecessary. The worst part, some awareness remains trapped inside. Magos Krennic's logs contain evidence of neural activity suggesting fragments of consciousness persist. Memories, dreams, a silent screaming that never ends. Tech priest Domitrax once wrote before his execution, "I saw a mining servitor stop and stare at a child who resembled his former daughter. A single tear tracked down what remained of his face before his control implants shocked him back to work." This is the dark bargain of the Forge Worlds. The Mechanicus requires endless servitors to maintain their industrial might. The Imperium needs the weapons and machines they produce. And so the horror continues, hidden behind sealed doors and sanitized reports. What does it say about humanity that we've created a future where people are converted into machines, not as mercy, but as punishment? In our own world, we debate the ethics of automation taking jobs. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, becoming the automation is the fate worse than death. How many of us would survive in such a world? How many would resist speaking out, knowing the price of defiance might be eternal imprisonment in our own mechanized bodies? The most terrifying truth isn't just that the Mechanicus creates these abominations. It's that the Imperium knows and considers it necessary. The servitor is the ultimate symbol of what the Imperium has become. Humanity stripped of everything except its capacity to serve. If this glimpse into the dark future of mankind disturbs you, perhaps that's appropriate. Join us in exploring these shadows by subscribing. Every view illuminates another corner of the grimdark future that awaits us all. The true face of a Forge world isn't found in the gleaming spires of the Magos districts, but in the vast, toxic wastelands that stretch beyond sight. Acid rains patter against corroded metal, each droplet burning skin on contact, while the horizon glows a sickly orange through perpetual smog. The Mechanicus calls these regions reclamation zones. The truth is far more sinister. Every Forge world contains vast territories deemed acceptable collateral in the pursuit of production. Entire continents sacrificed to toxic runoff. Oceans turned to caustic sludge that bubbles with chemical reactions, continuing centuries after initial contamination. Workers who live near these zones develop mutations, not the blessed enhancements the tech priests celebrate, but painful, debilitating deformities. Children born with translucent skin, revealing organs struggling to filter poisons from birth. Lungs that crystallize by age 20. Bones that become brittle and porous from heavy metal accumulation. The Mechanicus knows. Their data harvests track every statistical anomaly. On Lucius, an entire hive, 8 billion souls, was relocated when rare minerals were discovered beneath their foundations. The evacuation transports never arrived. Instead, mining equipment descended through hab blocks still occupied by families. The screaming lasted for weeks as excavators carved through living districts. Magos biologists examined these populations, not to heal, but to measure how much toxicity human flesh can endure before productivity declines. Test subjects shuffling through ash-choked corridors, their skin sloughing off in gray sheets, while cogitators record their vital signs. The most disturbing truth? These wastelands are expanding. With each passing century, Forge worlds consume more of their own territory. On Mars itself, only 0.03% of the surface remains habitable without extensive augmentation. The rest? A radioactive chemical hellscape, where even servitors decay within hours of exposure. When a Forge world exhausts its resources, the Mechanicus simply abandons it. Billions left to survive in the poisoned husk, while the priesthood relocates to fresh worlds. The forgotten continue to serve, harvesting toxic materials with bare hands until their bodies surrender. This is the Omnissiah's true legacy, a trail of dead worlds across the galaxy. And now we must ask ourselves the most terrifying question of all. How many Forge worlds remain before humanity has nowhere left to go? The Mechanicus calculates we have already poisoned 38% of humanity's viable industrial worlds. The rate accelerates with each passing millennium. Our own world faces similar environmental collapse. Corporate interests hide the true cost of production, while millions suffer the consequences. The Forge worlds of 40K aren't fiction. They're our future without intervention. What price are we willing to pay for progress? At what point does survival become meaningless if we've destroyed everything that made life worth living? The Red Priests of Mars continue their work in silence, their metallic hands stained with the invisible blood of trillions. And we, like the citizens of the Imperium, look away from uncomfortable truths. If this glimpse into the dark machinery of the Mechanicus has opened your eyes, join our cogitation network. Subscribe to delve deeper into the shadows the Imperium casts across the stars. Knowledge is power. Guard it well.